used to have these people that would come in to do shibari or some sort of suspension rope bondage, but I don't know if I don't really remember if they had anybody in the last one that did that. So, I mean, they try to change the people that go in there every so often. I think actually the dungeon is run by Kinky College, which they're based, I think, out of Chicago. So I know they have a profile on FetLife, and I think they're kinkycollege.com. It's kind of like where you can go to learn about kink and fetish in a little like kind of college setting. And the guy who runs it, Bruce, he's pretty cool actually. He brings like all this equipment, like these cages and St. Andrew's crosses, and he gets to have like dames like work the dungeon. So years and years ago, I actually used to help this other mistress kind of run the dungeon at Exotica. And I was always in the dungeon. I did like a foot worship party there. I had, males come in and rub all the dames' feet who were working the dungeon. And of course, I loved it because who doesn't love a really good foot massage or a foot rub? And then I would have like another year, I did like a sissy parade with a bunch of other mistresses and submissives and cross-dressers, and kind of got to dress them all up like, like whores, or dollification whores, and parade them around on stage so people can see like what different outfits and different looks. It was kind of like different. And then another time I did a live mummification at Exotica in 2014. 2015, I taught a needle play demo. And 2016, I think I did a electroplay needle demo where I did violet wand play with needles. And actually, I had this fella who, I think it was in 2014 I did the needles. I had this guy named Pete Tino, the human floor. If you look him up, he's in the Guinness Book of World Records. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records for having, I think it's like 5 or 6 heavy women totaling 1,000 pounds stand on top of him, right? So the human floor, he also works at a lot of screen parks and Halloween haunted houses where he's in the floor and people like walk on his face. And I had the opportunity of filming a couple of like short videos with him a few years back. I did Coffee with the Floor. I was sitting in Exotica wearing like the silver cat suit. And at the time I was considered a BBW. I was a big girl. So I did like what's called face sitting or queening. And myself and another dame were sitting in there having coffee. And we were sitting drinking our coffee like we were at a cafe. And instead of sitting on a bench, I was sitting with my clothes on the human floor's face. So his face was my seat, basically. And the other mistress was sitting facing me, hovering over him while he's like laying on this bench. So we're supported by the bench and the human floor. And she was sitting like straddling his knees, and she was resting her hot cup of coffee on his cock and balls, which was absolutely hilarious. So she's sitting there with her hot cup of coffee kind of, resting on his C and B. And I'm sitting there talking to her, having a snack, drinking coffee, he's holding my coffee, actually. His hand was in use for my coffee holder. And I was kind of like grinding my privates in his face while I was completely dressed. And mind you, he's the human floor. He likes to be stood on. So me and all these dames in the dungeon were kind of like using and abusing him, which he loves. And I'll tell you what, he was the most submissive man that I've ever met in my life. I mean, think about it. He loves to be called the human door floor mat or something, the human floor. He wants to be trampled on like a doormat. And, it's kind of funny. Most submissives, real submissives, would say, oh, some mistresses treat me like garbage. They treat me like a doormat. I said, well, first of all, that's not how you should be treated. You're beneath us, but we're not going to treat you like a doormat. But this guy wanted to be treated like he wanted to be walked on, stepped on, spit on, you name it. He wanted it done to him. So he had contacted me on FetLife back in 2013 and had told me that he saw my needle play demo that I did for Exotica the year before. And he was like, I've never had that done to me. He goes, I would really love to be your guinea pig for the weekend. How may I be of service to you? So I told him, I said, well, how about this? Meet me at Exotica at the Trump Taj Mahal, April 2014. Meet me on the floor convention center, and I'd be happy to work with you. I'm like, actually, I'm looking for somebody to film some good video footage with. So myself and another dame had like mummified a guy to this thing with saran wrap to the one cross. Actually, I have a picture of me tickling him on my OnlyFans page. It is pretty rare. Hasn't been in circulation at all in years, mind you. So that's a pretty interesting one. Then I have another bunch of videos of me on my FetLife profile, or I think that they might even be on his. I think they're on his FetLife profile, and he's on FetLife as the human floor. There's videos of me sitting on his face. There's a video of me standing right smack dead in the middle of Exotica, and he's like worshiping my ass in public. I'm completely dressed, but he's like really, he's a true Ashworth. He's a true submissive. He does anything that I ask him to do without hesitation. So I had told him I wanted specific things to do at Exotica to bring attention to the dungeon, so we did it. And then another time I went outside and smoked a cigarette, and I had gotten some gum on my boot. And I came back and was sitting and had my leg up, and the human floor goes, Mistress, can I tell you something? And I said, sure. He goes, you have gum on your boot. He goes, can I eat it off? May I? I said, yeah, sure. So I sat there and I leaned back and put my foot up with my boot on. And what do you know? This fucking guy ate dirty gum that had rocks and hair in it. And God only knows where and how long it's been on my boot. But he ate it off. He actually chewed it, opened his mouth, swallowed it, and then opened his mouth again and goes, look, mistress, all gone. I said, oh my goodness gracious. I said, you, my friend, are a very good submissive. I'm like, I wouldn't eat that fucking gum off my boot. But like, so and believe it or not, he didn't get sick at all. So anyway, that weekend, he had a top hat on, and he looked like a magician, and he had a cape. It was kind of funny. And I actually got to do a whole bunch of different stuff with him. I put a staple corset on his back, and I did some needle play, and then I took, with the stapling corset, I took some mylar ribbon, and I kind of laced up his back, and then I put the needles in between the corset, so I was able to kind of like make a double corset. And then what I did was I took some mylar, like tinsel garland, like from Christmas time, wrapped it all around his other parts of his back and his neck, because that stuff is conductive to the violet wand. So basically, I had electrified him after I had poked him with needles and put a needle staple corset on his back. I also, in the end of each needle hub, there's like a hole, so I put feathers in it to make him look like he had wings. So he said he loved every minute of it. He said at one time a dominatrix did something similar to him where she burned him with like a big fat cigar. And I said, listen, I'm a sadist, and I know you're a masochist, but I don't really know you well enough to kind of burn you, so I'm just going to leave you alone with that one. Like, that's something you got to do on somebody that you know for a long time. You just don't go around burning subs with cigars, I don't know. To me, that's kind of more on a personal level, if you ask me, So, but, so, I mean, look, I've done many things for Exotica. many things in my BDSM career of 32 years. I had started out as a submissive to a married couple, then worked in their home dungeon, and then kind of ventured into the city and did some stuff in the city. And then I found out probably within like a year that I really wasn't submissive. I just kind of, wanted to see what it was like if I could. And then actually the master and mistress who I belonged to, whatever, or was subbing for them in their house dungeon, basically like a dungeon cleanup person while I was getting trained. They had said that I really wasn't submissive either, and they thought that I would make a good mistress to train, that I had a very strong will. I was very bossy, and they heard how I interacted with other people, and they said, oh yeah, this girl is not submissive. So, but look, I did it because I wanted to understand both sides of the BDSM spectrum, both sides of the fence. So being a good dominant usually starts out as a submissive first, so they can kind of learn and understand the submissive slave side. Now, would I sub again? Absolutely not. But I like to try to take what I know in my mind and teach upon to others. So if you want to be a good submissive for mistress, the first thing you need to do is learn to follow directions, okay? Very simple stuff. If you can follow directions, or actually if you can follow a recipe, right? So BDSM to me is like a recipe. You have all these different ingredients and you kind of mix them up all together. So if you can follow an order or a recipe or even follow directions, then you're off to a good start, okay? The next thing I love is obedience. A real true submissive never talks a dominant, okay? So these things I look for. Now, when you're addressing a dominant, a mistress, or a master, and you are a sub, you are to address the mistress or master with a capital M and the rest of the letters lowercase. When you're addressing yourself as a submissive or a slave to a dominant, you never start off your conversation as I want. And it will not be a capital letter I. So the I want or uppercase or lowercase is still pretty bad in my opinion. So here's a slave or a submissive coming to a master or mistress, approaching them in a kind of an informal way, because a lot of subs will approach doms and say, I want this. Okay, well, that's great and all, but do you understand your purpose? If you want to be a long-term slave of mine, you cannot come to a mistress or a master and say, I want. Because right then and there, that tells me that this person is in the lifestyle for their own needs. Like they may be a fetishist, they may be or somebody just kind of wanting to be in the spotlight all the time, and it's all about them. Now, a dominant like myself, if someone tells me they're a sub or a slave and they come to me and say, I'm going to say, well, listen, I don't think you realize the first thing about being submissive. So I'm going to tell you that, you are wrong. So the part of being, a sub to or a slave to a dominant is that you can approach them and say, mistress, how may I be in service to you? Okay. Hello. How are you? How may I be in service to you? May I ask you a question or two? And then if I say yes, then you come back to me and say, okay, I would like to discuss blah, 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 if permissible. I would like to explore these types of fetishes. Or what are your limits? Then I would turn around and say, what are your limits? Also, I've had people who've played with me who told me they were actually extreme masochists. Then, after me initially warming them up and then, of course, tenderizing your meat before you play with it. And basically, to the effect of then getting to play with them, whether it's a spanking with a bare hand or a paddle or a flog or whatever. They tell me that they have a huge pain tolerance. Well, I'll tell you what. Not all of you are made out to be